Hi, Sophie. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
For anybody who doesn't know, could you give a brief introduction into who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Sophie Kjærvik. I'm a Postdoctoral Fellow at the Injury and Violence Prevention Program at Virginia Commonwealth University. My research focuses mostly on aggression and violence and how to reduce such destructive behaviors in society.
Could you briefly explain what is anger?
Yeah, so anger is an emotional response to a real or imagined threat or provocation, which means that there is something in your environment that is maybe blocking your goals or threatening you to get where you want to get. So let's say you are driving a car, there is a provocation, let's say that's a roadblock, it makes you frustrated and angry, and that is anger. Frustration is often considered a part of anger. So it goes from irritation and annoyance to severe anger, which is more the type of rage that you can think about.
The car analogy makes sense with the road rage and all those kind of things. Tyson. Is anger regulated differently to other emotions by people, or is it a similar way that it's treated by your brain to stuff like sadness or something like that?
So all emotions are considered to have two components. So you have what we call valence, which is whether the emotion feels good or feels bad. And then you have the intensity of the emotion, which goes from low physiological arousal. So that is the body's reaction, your heart rate, all that in your body. And then goes from low to high. So you can think that, for example, sadness feels bad, but it has low physiological arousal, whereas happiness feels good and it has high physiological arousal. Anger is an emotion that feels bad, and it has also high physiological arousal.
So how would you quantify that kind of thing coherently in a study? Because obviously it's something that's a lot of people, emotions people feel internally. How would you quantify that to understand it better?
So in this study, we looked at self-reports of anger. So obviously, people are saying that they feel angry or saying that they feel sad or fearful, and so on. In other studies, people use more physiological data where you can measure people's heart rate and their response rate in their body. And or while they're exposing them to stimuli. So that could be provoking stimulus or it could be fearful stimulus, for example. Another way of measuring this is behavioral responses. So, for example, if you're wanting to look at aggression, because aggression is a behavioral response, whereas emotions are feelings and emotions. Anger is different, and then you can measure anger as a behavioral response. So some studies, for example, measure anger in the way that they are provoked, and then they are allowed to give a type of noise blast to a different participant. And that can be either the participant that provoked them, or it can be a random participant. And then the level of the noise blast, because it's an unpleasant experience, is the level of aggression the person is expressing.
How are they provoked in a sense in the study? Does it vary, or is there normally a set way of provoking someone into anger?
There are different ways. So some of the questions actually just ask participants, how angry do you feel right now? And afterwards and then they have them exposed to some physical activity and then they ask them afterwards, how angry do you feel now? So they're not really provoked at all. But you see that it's a pre-post measure, which we call it, where they are um, report how angry they feel. The exposure to some physiological or some activity. And that is most of the studies. Some studies also actually go in and provoke participants. So that can be, it's very diverse, but a very common measure or a very common way to do it is to have someone write an essay on a topic that they are passionate about. So often these are very politically loaded topics. Oftentimes it can be about abortion, for example, where people are asked to write a paper an essay on what they think about abortion, and then they are told that another participant will evaluate their essay. And obviously, it's not another participant evaluating their essay. They're actually getting feedback from the clinical researcher, and the clinical researcher is, let's say, trashing their paper.
I was going to say that's gaslighting them to the max, pretty much, which is. But do some people have a predisposition to being more angry? Is there a genetic or like a environmental factor into being someone who gets more angry more easily?
I think we don't talk about this a lot in our paper, but there is, because obviously there is a genetic predisposition to all of your traits and who you are. And some people with certain personality traits are more likely to express aggression and be more hostile than other people. But when it comes to anger, we talked about the difference between state anger and trait anger. And trait anger are people that are consistently more angry across situations and contexts, whereas state anger is more of a measure of a single situation. So we also looked at the difference in our study between trait and state anger and didn't really find a difference.
So for somebody who has trait anger, can that be changed, or is that something that's always set inside them, that's their base level of anger and it can't really be adjusted?
No, you can work on it, definitely. Trait anger is something that you, to some extent, have learned through your life. And so you're not doomed to be angry forever if you're if you used to, let's say for a year, you were a super angry person. Certain environmental cues can make you also more angry. We see that people that have that are more stressed, that are more exposed to hot climates, that are exposed to certain environmental situations, find themselves being more angry. So, for example, with the environment, we see that in hotter climates, people are more angry than in colder climates.
Another difference that I would assume is that there's a gender difference in the amount of anger experienced by the two genders. I feel like most people assume men are more aggressive than women. Is that the case?
Research suggests that men express more anger than women. However, there are some inconsistencies in the research because women tend to express more relational aggression. So this hostility and more the interpersonal aggression, bullying, and so forth. Whereas men are more likely to express physical violence. And so that is, let's say, punching someone in the face. Um, so I guess there are differences, but it's also important to look at the differences between different types of aggression and violence. Unfortunately, we also do see that there are more men in prison than there are women for violent crimes. And so obviously, the expression of anger, the expression of aggression, when it comes to the violent part, which is also different from aggression. And so aggression is interpersonal always. It has to involve at least two people. And it is a behavior that is unwanted by the other person that is experiencing it. It can be verbal, so you can yell at someone in their face, and it can be physical, so you can punch someone in the face. It can also be relational, which is more of the talking behind someone's back, which is more linked to females. And then it can be direct. So you can either talk behind someone's back or yell directly in their face. And so there is a difference between very many different forms of aggression and violence that we talk about.
I assume that's mainly down to hormonal differences.
Some researchers attribute it to testosterone, but there is again differences in research. Some find it, some do not. And it also comes down to how we're raised. So men, especially in more masculine cultures, are taught that they should express anger physically, whereas women are learned to express emotionally. So I think it has a lot to do with culture and family as well as more genetics and so on.
Yeah, definitely. There's a culture of settling it in a certain way. If there's some sort of disagreement, especially if it's between two men. It's like I guess macho, definitely like genetic, like biological predisposition to feel like they have to duke it out or something like that. Especially when you're someone who around my age, being at university, you see a lot of that at 3 a.m. outside nightclubs. So you can definitely see
Yeah.
the differences there. Although, to be fair, some of the girls do get into it too. So I'm not, both sides of the spectrum definitely can get into it for sides. But
Yeah. We're not saying that no women.
no, definitely not.
Definitely.
So in terms of the time it takes to get angry, I'm not, if you get what I'm trying to say, there's obviously people, I know people, this is like mainly anecdotal, but people who won't be angry for extended period, but when they are, they're extremely angry. And then there's some people who are just very quick to rise. Are there particular reasons behind some people who fly off the handle very quickly? And are there ways to become a bit more temperate and be able to withhold that anger? And is that even healthy? Sorry, that's quite a lot of questions, but
Yeah, so people deal with emotions. Often we call it in 3 different ways. You either express your anger, you suppress your anger, or you eliminate your anger. And so expressing anger, we all know what that looks like. It's venting anger. It's, yeah, like you said, like fly up the rails and just rage immediately. Or you can suppress your anger. So you can pretend that nothing happened. And then it's going to build up inside and it's going to feel really bad. And you're just going to ruminate on your anger and maybe become more angry. The same goes for venting anger. You also become more angry by venting anger. So it's not a solution that either. And then the third solution is to eliminate anger, which is, as I would say, the right solution. And that is to deal with your anger in a calm and collected manner. And that could be anything from trying to relax and be okay with that. It's allowed to be angry. I'm not saying that you can't be angry and that we shouldn't be angry. Anger can also be a very productive emotion that drives us to reach our goals and to fight social injustices in the world. And so we definitely need anger, and we should feel angry. But at the same time, um, yelling and screaming is not productive, and it doesn't help in any situation. But you could at the same time think that people that are activists and that are standing up for what they believe in, they're angry. All of them are usually pretty angry about the situation they're in. And oftentimes they are demonstrating, but they're also doing so in a controlled situation, unless it becomes violent, and then it's not so controlled anymore.
so it's a case of more channeling the emotion into a more positive outlet rather than letting it take your entire function where you're just in a fit of rage, essentially.
Yeah. So it's about controlling your anger instead of letting your anger control you.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Um,
You can't be in control of what happens in the world, but you can be in control of your emotional responses to what happens in the world. And so that is kind of the idea with learning techniques to control your anger, is that anger is an emotion that you can control with training and with time.
yeah. So what techniques would you suggest specifically that could help with channeling the anger the right way, especially if you're someone who has problems with regulating it?
Yeah, so what we find in our meta-analytic review, where we included 154 studies and over 10,000 participants, was that consistently across these studies, meditation, mindfulness, and muscle relaxations were effective at reducing anger. We also found that yoga, which oftentimes also includes an aspect of the mindfulness, or meditation, also reduce anger. And so doing activities where you are focusing on reducing the arousal in your body, basically calming down your fight response and activating your parasympathetic nervous system. So this is your immobile nervous system that makes you relaxed. And so by making your body more relaxed and focusing on uh, cooling down, you can consistently and productively reduce your anger.
One thing that I read that I wasn't expecting when I initially read your research was that using outlets like exercise aren't normally the best way to do it, because I box, so I've always had it in my head when I'm doing boxing, when I'm hitting a heavy bag, that if I've had a bad day, I can take my anger out. I mean, I'm not literally so aggressive that I'm like purely taking anger out, but in my head, I've always had this notion that like I can take the anger out on the bag and use that as an outlet to channel my anger. But what I read that is that is arousal increasing, and that might not necessarily be the best way to do that.
Yeah. So the problem with exercising when you are angry is that when you're angry, you are in a state of high physiological arousal. And so your body is activated, you're ready to fight. And when you are boxing, you're also activating your body and ready to fight, let's say it that way. And so when you're adding more activation, your brain can misinterpret that activation as anger. And so people oftentimes then experience that they do not become less angry, but they actually become more angry. And another thing is that when you are expressing your anger in a way of boxing at a bag or yelling at someone in their face, you're practicing aggressive behavior. And that we see from studies with young kids or older people is that not only when they see other people express aggression, but express anger, but also when they are learning that when you're angry, you should express your anger, then that becomes a learning curve in your brain, and you're thinking, okay, well, every time I'm angry, I'm just going to punch something. And so then when you're angry and you don't have a punching bag to punch, you might end up punching someone, which is very undesirable, obviously.
Yeah, I guess when I was reading about your stuff also, I saw that one of the inspirations for doing this research was the rise in the number of rage rooms. They've been a thing on TikTok recently. I remember seeing them, people just smashing stuff up, and it's apparently meant to take away your anger. Essentially, you were saying that is quite counterproductive, actually.
Yeah, because again, you are practicing expressing anger. So we don't want people to practice expressing anger because we don't want people to express anger in an aggressive way. And so if you every time you're angry need to smash objects, then that's going to be very non-productive for society. Considering that we have many people in this world that are poor and don't have access to all these things that people are smashing in their rage rooms, it's frustrating to see that we're actually paying to smash things that some people need. But not only that, that is a more of a passion. I think the thing with rage rooms is that you are learning, you're teaching yourself that, oh, smashing objects is a good way of dealing with anger. And we see from studies with boxing bags and so on is that people that are angry, they go in and they're told that they can hit this boxing bag. They hit it and they're asked right after, how do you feel? And they say, I feel great. This is great. I feel amazing. And then we measure their aggression afterwards, so their aggressive behavior, and they're actually more aggressive than they were before. And so expressing anger might feel good, but it makes you more aggressive.
Yeah, definitely. I see what you mean there. It's a case of you're you're having like a short term release of that for a long term detriment to your overall ability to deal with the emotion in the first place.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. I mean, you oftentimes see also that people that have professions that are about expressing anger often also end up doing things that are violent outside of their job. I mean, I don't know how common it is. I don't have a frequency count for that, but you see it sometimes in media. People, for example, that are playing American football, they blame it on CTE, and it might often also be that they have CTE, which is a brain disorder that makes you more aggressive. But they end up because they also have a passion, and then they become more aggressive people.
So if somebody feels like they have problems with this kind of thing, what kind of solution specifically would you think they should implement into their lives? And are there places they can go specifically for it, or is it more of a you just need to work it out by yourself kind of thing?
I definitely think if people have an anger issue, and it is something that is a trait, not a state, that is consistent in your life, you should definitely seek help from a professional anger management class or a psychologist that can help you um, create positive solutions for your anger. But when it comes to stuff that you can do on your own, we've seen that consistently in our studies that doing activities such as meditation and mindfulness and muscle relaxations are effective at reducing anger. And obviously, we see all these different apps. There are countless of YouTube videos that you can look at for guided meditation, guided mindfulness, and that are free options, so you don't even have to pay for it. Which is some of what I'm passionate about is telling people that you don't need to pay hundreds of dollars to get your anger in control. You can actually do it on your own. Um, but yeah, I think it's important to remember that these activities are things you can do on your own, and that the more you practice them, the better you become at regulating your emotions. And that mindfulness and meditation are not only effective when it comes to anger, but they're also effective for stress and anxiety, which are two other very common issues we see in today's society. And so I think everyone should implement this into their lives, regardless of your situation.
Yeah, I guess it's just finding a routine where you can fit in that into your day. Just make it just as important as doing exercise for your body. It's like doing exercise for your mind in a sense. I think it's just equally as important.
I also want to point out that it doesn't have to be more than 5 minutes. It can be 5 minutes, it can be 20 minutes. The thing is, if you do it every day for 5 minutes, uh, even if you're doing like guided meditation in a form of journaling, that has also shown to be very effective for managing your emotions. And so I think it's important to do these activities to get more in tune with your emotional responses and how you actually deal with your emotions. And I know that a lot of people in today's society are not very in tune and in control of their emotions.
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing with mindfulness, I find that often when I've tried doing it, I think over lockdown I was quite good at it, and then after a while it's kind of tailed off when all the free time disappeared. But I distinctly remember going for having 2 minutes where I couldn't focus at all, especially doing breathing meditations, and going to being able to do 15 minutes fully just focus and not my focus not wavering a lot. And there was a quote from a Headspace guy. I'm not sure what his name is, but it was on the app, and I got the free trial because I was a student. And I have it, the quote here. It's, slow breathing is like an anchor in the midst of an emotional storm. The anchor won't make the storm go away, but it will hold you steady until it passes. I think that sums it up pretty well in terms of how important it is to just be still for a little bit as a way to control your anger.
Yes, it is. And some researchers even suggest that just counting to 10 can be enough.
Yeah, exactly. It's just having a pause rather than just letting the whole situation unravel in front of you.
Yeah.
You were looking into the link between narcissism and aggression specifically. So is there a particular link between those two characteristics?
Yes, the narcissism is linked to all types of aggression and violent behaviors. So the more narcissistic you are, the more likely you are also to be aggressive.
A lot of people feel like they know a narcissist. I think there's like a trend like, oh, my ex is a narcissist. But like, how likely is someone to actually be a narcissist? And is it you just are or you're not, or is it more like a sliding scale of how much you are or aren't?
So narcissism, the way we are looking at it, or the way I'm looking at it in my research, is on a continuum. So it goes from no or 0 to 100, let's say it that way. And some people score fairly low on narcissism, and some people score very high on narcissism. And the people that score extremely high on narcissism are diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. And so that's not a huge percentile of the population at all. But we see that a lot of people in today's society obviously say that someone is narcissistic because they're egoistic, or they're focusing on themselves, or they're prioritizing their own needs in front of everyone else, which are narcissistic behaviors and narcissistic tendencies. However, that does not mean that you are a narcissist. I don't refer to anyone as a narcissist or as a narcissist. It's narcissistic, or being more narcissistic, or being less narcissistic. And no, it's not not a dichotomy.
Yeah, there's a subreddit on Reddit with almost 1 million followers called Narcissistic Parents. And I just feel like that surely there can't be that many people who feel like their parents are narcissists. I feel like some of them probably are, but I feel like maybe the term gets thrown about a little bit too much.
Yes, it's become very popular in today's society to call someone a narcissist just because you don't agree with their behaviors, uh, which is not necessarily the case. Um, we see that one researcher, her name is Sean Twang, has written a book about the narcissistic generation, where she explains that today's youth, or today's university students, undergrads, to be more specific. And this book is not new as of this year, but it's been a trending book uh, from the early 2000s until I guess a couple years ago. That points out that people and the younger generation are becoming more and more narcissistic. However, there's also research to suggest that this is not the case, and that maybe her specific research at her specific university might be very specific. But I think there is, to some extent, a trend in that people are somewhat more narcissistic. And some of the explanation to why people have become more narcissistic, among the people that think people have become more narcissistic, is that we had a generation of parents that were taught to praise children. And so overpraising children based on nothing has been linked to narcissism. So if you are told that you're a princess and you're the best, um, or you're a prince and you can never do anything wrong and you're the best at everything, then you're going to start internalizing that, and you're going to start believing that, and you're going to turn more narcissistic in that extent.
Yeah, it's the participation medal kind of effect where everybody got told they're a winner at school, even if they came last, they're still a winner, and it became a thing where it's like, well, if everybody's a winner, then nobody's a winner, so everybody believes that they should be at the top. So, are there specific parenting techniques that you can use to avoid developing a child that becomes more narcissistic?
Yes, part of it is, I mean, there's also research to suggest the opposite. So parents that neglect their children and never praise them for anything can also get narcissistic children. So there's a medium good middle road, to say it that way, and that is to praise your kids when it's rewarded and when they have done something good. But you never need to tell your child that they're the best in the world. You never need to give them a golden star on everything they do. You can say that they did a good job, and you can promote learning. So you can tell your child that, oh, I really like that you did this on this picture. I see that you haven't done this before, and that's a good progress that you were doing. So rewarding efforts instead of just saying, oh, this is the best picture I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's not just blanket statement. It almost seems as if you care less to say, oh my God, this is the best thing ever to everything, because it's almost like just a default answer rather than a heartfelt, oh, this is actually really good to this one specific thing they've actually done. I feel like a lot of children aren't stupid enough to, they probably see through that after a certain age anyway, essentially. They just say that just so they don't have to answer the question properly.
That might be, and that they're not actually paying attention. But I haven't read any research about that specifically.
That's just me purely spitballing, to be fair. I haven't read anything yet. It's just a off the dome kind of thing. But there are 3 types of narcissism specifically that you mentioned. I don't know specifically what they are. So could you explain that the 3 are entitlement, grandiose, and vulnerable? So what are the differences between the 3, and how does that affect the person's personality?
Yeah, so the vulnerable narcissism is more like what we think about as a neurotic person. So they want the praise, but they're also not, they're easily wounded and take everything in a way, but they want to be the best. But they're all easily offended. And so that's a hard life. And then you have the grandiose narcissist, which is the common type of narcissist that everyone thinks about. The ones that stands with a cape on top of the theater and wants everyone to look at them and think they're the best and think they're on top of the world. And then you have the entitlement, which is the core of narcissism. And so it's the balance between the vulnerable and the grandiose, and kind of the middle row of narcissism.
What triggers aggression in these individuals more than the average person who doesn't display these kind of tendencies?
Yeah, so ego threats, telling them that they're not the center of the universe, is really harmful to people with narcissistic tendencies or more narcissistic tendencies. So let's go back to the essay about abortion. If they're evaluated on that essay as telling them that this is the worst essay I've ever written, and you deserve an F, and this is really bad, a person scoring higher in narcissism would react more aggressively to that feedback than a person lower on narcissism.
Is it possible to reverse that and get thicker skin, essentially, and not rise to that provocation so easily? Or is it something that kind of gets taught early on and then you kind of just sticks with you?
It's problematic with narcissism when it is at the most extreme. So narcissistic personality disorder has been found to be really hard to treat. And the thing is that they believe they're the center of the universe. They believe they can never be wrong. And if you believe that you can never be wrong, that you're the best in the world, then how are you going to take feedback from other people and actually start working on yourself and changing your perception of yourself? And so it's possible, but it takes a lot of work, and it's about changing your perception and your ego, and not letting your ego take over your personality.
When science discovers the center of the universe, a lot of people will be disappointed to find that they are not it, and I thought it was quite funny in terms of.
Yeah, we started out our article with
Yeah.
Because I also thought it was funny, and I think it's important to remember that most people can be more humble, that you don't need to get confirmation or affirmation for everything you do. You don't need to get praise for everything you do. You can take your reward as, oh, I like how I did this, or appreciating your efforts without necessarily getting external validation for your efforts.
So, one thing I did think was potentially social media be causing that spike in egocentric people, because I guess if you have a feed where you're posting specifically about yourself, which is something a lot of people had access to like 20 years ago, and now you have a whole multiple pages, you might have a LinkedIn and a Twitter and an Instagram and a TikTok, which a lot of the time can be centered around yourself. Could that cause that rise in people thinking of themselves as the center of the universe?
Yeah, so Dr. Sean Twang is also explaining that the narcissistic generation might be due to some extent, obviously, by the parental experience, but also about social media and how we're constantly getting external praise from peers saying, "Oh my God, this is the cutest picture I've ever seen. You're gorgeous." Um, and all these comments on your pictures that you're posting that are obviously making you feel good, but maybe they also are contributing to your ego inflating.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen enough of the Instagram posts where you're like, you can't, some people just comment on every single one, and you're like, at some point, it becomes a bit past parody. You're praising by default rather than actually stop and go, oh, this is a very nice photo. It's just every single one has the exact same comments. It's not really special anymore.
Right. It's I'm thinking back to the time when Facebook came out and everyone posted on your social media or your Facebook page, happy birthday. And it didn't really feel special, but then you had the few people that wrote you a message or called you. And those are the messages that feel important. I mean, all those people just seeing that it's your birthday on Facebook and reading, it's like, very low. And I mean, for some people, it feels really special, and for other people, it doesn't necessarily. And that comes down to who you are as a person, I guess.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Yeah, it's different when someone sends you a message on a group chat, for example, after they've seen 10 people go and they go, oh, I need to message you happy birthday as well, compared to if someone sends you a direct message. Or someone thing I found when I was growing up, I'm not sure if you had the same, but because I was part of a generation who had like Snapchat. That's a thing growing up, and people would post onto their story saying happy birthday to me as a way to then get messages back saying happy birthday. And I just found that so crazy that they felt the need to announce their birthday just so they get the validation of the birthday message. I think that whole thing just felt surreal. I mean, I know they're 15 years old, they're 14, 15, they need that validation of, oh, I had like 30 people, 40 people message me happy birthday. But I just always just felt like, why would I do that? I'd rather the people who actually care about my birthday message me about my birthday. But again, I think it's a case of that validation that needs validation. Maybe our generation just, I think they see everybody else doing it and they're like, well, maybe I have to do it too.
Yeah, I think part of it is it's an interesting thing to talk about as well. Is that before the age of 10 to 12 years old, you cannot accurately assess narcissism because people younger than that are have an inflated ego regardless. And so if you're introducing all these social media platforms, I know it's not intentionally that way, but a lot of young people are using social media, even though they're not reaching the age limits. Um, if you're introducing social media and they get used to that praise, it's going to continue with the ego inflation uh, throughout their life oftentimes, unless they get bored of social media.
They just get stuck at that infantile level of ego where they instead of developing into an adult who can understand that they're not the most important person, it just continues essentially.
Yeah, that's an hypothesis. I haven't read any research on that, and it's something I've been interested in for a long time. I got my PhD in communication, and I study aggression and violence now. But I'm interested in going back to looking at, and there is a lot of researchers right now looking at how social media is influencing our mental health, and obviously we can see a lot of research on how it's linked to anxiety and depression and so on. There's less research on how it's linked to narcissism and all these dark personality traits that we often tend to look at, such as machiavellianism, sadism, and psychopathy in the aggression world. But there is some research to suggest that, for example, cyberbullying is more prevalent among people that are high in psychopathy or high in narcissism or these dark personality traits.
So to wrap it up, I would say if someone is finding themselves to maybe resonate a bit too much with some of the character traits discussed, what would be a piece of advice you give to maybe someone trying to turn that around or adjust their lifestyle to change that in terms of maybe aggression?
I think in order to deal with your aggression, like the first step is to acknowledge that it is an issue. And once you acknowledge that it is an issue, and if it's a huge issue, you should probably get help to deal with that. But if it's a smaller issue or not bothering you day to day, I think doing activities such as we talked about, such as mindfulness and meditation, and getting more in tune with your emotions and understanding why, what are your triggers? And oftentimes people are taught to ask themselves, what is making me angry right now? Can I deal with it? And if you can deal with it, if you're okay with it, then you can let it go. And so let's say you're driving your car, you're getting frustrated because the person in front of you is driving really, really slow. And then you can ask yourself, is this important? Does it have a big impact on my life? No, probably not. You're going to forget about it probably in the next half minute because you're passing that person or the person get off at the next exit and it's forgotten. Was it then necessary to get aggressive and sit in your car and yell at that person? Probably not. It wasn't worth it. You were getting angry, and as we know, being angry and feeling angry is not good for your heart. And so if you want to take care of your own mental health and your physical health, finding ways of dealing with your anger in a more productive way it's desirable.
Yeah, there's the saying that's like if how much are you going to think about this in the next minute, and then the next hour, then the next day, then a week, and then a month, and then if your parts are like in the next hour or day, you know, it's not going to be affecting your life anymore. Then maybe it isn't something you should be so. But yeah, as someone who lives in an area that has a lot of 20 miles per hour speed limits just been introduced, I can definitely relate to the slow drivers. It is maybe the most infuriating thing to happen to my life recently. Yeah, no, it was a massive backlash to it. But yeah, a lot of the roads that were like 30 miles per hour got changed to 20, and it is. I don't know if you have those, but they have these signs that have your speed and a little smiley face next to it. It's meant to be a psychological thing, I think, because you want this face to be smiley, so you go slow. But it is maybe the worst thing ever, being stuck behind someone, and when it flashes the speed and it says 70, and I'm like, at this point, we could get out and walk, and I think we'd be going faster. The cyclist there and there is overtaking us, so I'll make sure I do some mindfulness in the car to help me do that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're feeling angry on your drive home from work, and let's say you have a roommate or a partner waiting at you at home, you come home and you're frustrated and angry, and you don't have good ways of dealing with your anger, so you come home and you're lashing out at your partner, who is an innocent bystander in the situation. It's going to harm your social relationships, and so finding ways to deal with anger is a good thing.
Sophie, you've been an incredible guest. I feel like I need to give you a few years to do some more research. So you could drop you another email, and you could come back on and give me another wisdom dump for me to absorb.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind.
Very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.